So let's get into chapter 10. Well, let's get into Jesse's questions first. It's a tradition now, right? We've got to start with a couple of those. A couple of them we talked about in the Discord server, and that was fun. A couple of them I think we're going to pick up on in the chat today about some of the passages we're going to talk about. Two I wanted to pick up on quickly. One of the questions, let me read it verbatim. It was about Strider believing in Frodo's explanation of the accident at the Prancing Pony. Do you think Strider believes Frodo when he says putting on the ring was an accident? Or in other words, how much does Strider know about the ring? So those are, so two ways of asking the same question, but I think we can answer them separately. I think that the text gives us lots of cues that he doesn't really fully believe him. I mean, putting accident in quotation marks. I think he says something like, accident, he says, your little prank. And Frodo interrupts, it was sheer accident. And he says, well, accident then. Yes, Seth, that's right. I do tell Rachel regularly that I'm catching up on her quickly. So I'll be at around 2 million pretty soon, I think. I'm pretty sure there are that many nerdy Tolkien fans in the world. Sorry. Anyway. So it's clear that he doesn't believe him. Why doesn't he believe him? Is it because, to Jesse's question, he knows what the ring does, he knows about its lore, and can anticipate that it's going to be exerting its will and its influence that way? I think the answer is yes, but I also think the word prank is conspicuous, right? That we talked about this last week, but Frodo did not make a good first impression on Strider as the appointed ring bearer that Gandalf was sending. He clearly believes it possible that Frodo intended to put it on and did so as a prank or a joke, and just isn't taking this whole flight out of the Shire seriously. And I think he has lots of good evidence for that, right? But how much does he know about the ring? I would think a lot. He doesn't have a great ring. He has no experience with any of the great rings, or we have no reason to believe that he does in the way that Gandalf does. He also wouldn't have any experience directly with the One Ring. What he does have, though, is Gandalf, and he has Gandalf's confidence, right? Gandalf has already said that he confided in Strider, and obviously has taken him into his confidence. So we have to assume that anything Gandalf knows about the ring, he has told Strider over their long journeys together. I mean, they went and hunted Gollum together, right? Like they've spent a lot of time together, it is clear. So what does Strider know about the ring, or what can we assume he knows about the ring? Well, everything that Gandalf does, save for the actual experience of having a great ring, right? So I think it's, the answer is, I think he thinks that he's goofing around and not taking it seriously, but I also believe he knows that the ring will probably be influencing him in not taking it seriously. And then the other question that I wanted to take up, great point, Jesse. She says, I agree that he probably knows a lot, especially with the comment about Frodo becoming a wraith. Yes, so he knows not only lore about the ring, but also that if held onto by a mortal and used, that bearer will fade and become a wraith. And he says, don't even kid about that. Don't allow your will to become accommodated to that endpoint. I think that's what he's getting at there. And an excellent point, Maddie. Is it possible Strider would have met Bilbo and or heard about Bilbo's prank with the ring? And since Frodo was close to Bilbo, ... Yes, absolutely. He would absolutely know about this. We I mean, spoilers, we will find out that they know each other, but I think we already get a little hint of it in the chapter that we've just read, right? Um, when Sam recites the Gilgalad was an Elven King poem, and he says, Mr. Bilbo made that up, he replies, no, he didn't make that up. He translated it. I never knew that. Which none of the hobbits pick up on. But why would you say that if you don't know, if you couldn't be expected to know that, right? If that is news, well, if he doesn't know Bilbo at all or anything about him or anything, why would you say I never knew that? You can only say I never knew that if there was some reasonable possibility of you knowing that. So that's a big clue that he does know Bilbo. And yes, absolutely, he would have heard about that prank and that joke. I'm sure Bilbo told it at length, repeatedly. And so, yes, that's a great point, Matt. He would know, he would well know that that Baggins's treat this ring as a prank. Yes, yes, yes. Claire asks, is it possible talking about the race is bad because it could summon or call to them, kind of like Tom Bombadil and the three times thing? I think, yes. I think that naming things in this fantasy sort of context, in this genre, it does give them power, right? I don't know if that's his primary concern. That wouldn't at least be my guess as to what his primary concern is. I think he knows that Frodo has to train his will to the resistance of the ring. And joking around about, maybe I'll let it get me, is a bad idea because it softens you, right? Now, I don't think Strider understands hobbits very well. I don't think it's as I don't think him saying that would be as detrimental to his will as maybe a human saying that would be. I don't think you're off base there in asking about that, but I don't think that's his primary concern, or wouldn't be my guess anyway. Um, yeah, yeah. Um, Christy says a theme a lot so far seems to be that words bring things into being. No one wants to talk about bad stuff out loud, like the enemy and turning into wraiths. Yeah, and particularly at night. I mean, there are things that both Gandalf in chapter 2 and Tom Bombadil won't talk about at night, in the darkness. And I mean, objectively, from a scientific standpoint, it shouldn't make a difference, but one of the big themes of this book is hope and despair, right? And the struggle of will. And if you are talking about evil things with regularity or casually, and you're talking about them at night in darkness, in terror, in fear, that will impact your hope and despair meter. But just as a tangent, and you're probably not referring to this, but there is one note in the text where I think we may be tempted to look at that. I always have been, and think, oh, like he's saying, don't name that thing. I think it's a more mundane explanation, and that's when he says, I think it was right after the Gilgalad poem, and Sam says something about, the rest of the verses were about Mordor. Never thought I'd be going that way myself. And Pippin cries out, or he cried. Pippin cried, I think is the wording. Going to Mordor. I hope it doesn't come to that. And Strider rebukes him. Do not say that name or say such things so loudly. I don't think that he's saying don't say Mordor, because Strider says Mordor himself to Barliman. And Sam says Mordor, and he doesn't get rebuked, but Pippin yells it. And I think that the issue there is he's already said, there are spies around, right? The birds and beasts could be spies. And he doesn't want the name Mordor to be heard in connection to this party tramping through the woods. So yes, don't name things. Yes, don't speak of evil things, particularly at night. But I think that's a bit more mundane. That's more strategic. Yeah. Okay. There's a good chat going on about resistance to the ring and how it affects other characters. I think we'll get to that a bit more, but um, I would only say I think the ring pulls everyone equally, or attempts to, but it affects those with weaker will, or a will oriented in the wrong direction. I won't say weaker will. Um, could be a strong will oriented poorly. Um, it pulls them more strongly. Oh, I could spend the whole night talking about that passage, Claire. She says, not really a question per se, but I thought Tolkien's history of the ponies was interesting. It's interesting that he chose to go on for that long about their history. Right, the ponies that were rustled and then made their way to the downs. Okay, we could spend the night on that. I love that part too. That's great, especially the last line. Right, um, there was something they were spared a hard journey, a dangerous journey, but they never got to Rivendell. And you just think, what a pony heaven Rivendell must have been, a fertile valley like that. Yeah. Okay, the other question quickly that I wanted to pick up on Jesse's question 6. Why does Strider carry around a broken sword? And does he actually fight with it, or does he have a second one for combat? I know there's a spoiler in the first part of this question, but ignoring the historical importance of the sword, I still don't get why he would keep it on him. Okay, he says to Sam, right? Not much use, is it? Not much use as a broken sword. Now, I would argue with that. I mean, he could certainly dispatch the four hobbits if he wanted to with a foot-long sword. But no, not much use as a primary weapon. And I would agree. I can't remember who said. I think Erulis or Erulisse. I don't know. If you read or hear this, let me know how it's pronounced. But I think that it would be cumbersome to carry around a sword, particularly two swords. So I would guess that he doesn't have a secondary sword on him. I would guess he probably has one, and I would guess, this is all speculation, that he doesn't carry around Narsil, the broken sword, all the time, or has carried it all his life. I would guess that he has a primary weapon, whether bow or sword or something, for normal use. But he knows things are happening now. He knows this is his time, right? And I think that, I mean, he says to Sam, the time is coming when it will be forged anew. He knows where they're going. He knows why. If this is, I mean, if his house has been carrying this sword for so long, in anticipation of the time when it will need to be forged anew, this is the time to carry it. So I think he is bringing it to Rivendell. Now, we don't know for sure whether he has always carried it his whole life. Maybe, maybe not. I don't have a strong opinion on that. My guess is he hasn't. But it's a reminder, yes, of the failings of Isildur and the weakness of the Men of Numenor. And it's a sort of a heirloom of his house. But I think that the mythic significance of it takes effect at this time, when he knows that, okay, along the however many generations from Elros on down, now it needs to be forged anew. So now I need to carry it. Okay. let's get into it. So the close reading that we wanted to, or that was picked that we're gonna do is about Strider's Aragorn's Strider character, right? The character that he plays in Bree, and why that character is so rascally, and why the disguise, and why all those things. What is the effect of playing the Strider character? And I think it's a really good question, and a lot of interesting stuff here. So what I want to do is start on page 217 of my book. We're going to go a little out of order here, but I want to frame the issue a little bit. So Sam has just objected to Strider joining the company, and Frodo says, I don't agree. I think you are not really as you choose to look. You began to talk to me like the Bree folk, but your voice has changed. Still, Sam seems right in this. I don't see why you should warn us to take care, and yet ask us to take you on trust. Why the disguise? Who are you? So I think that's the question, right? That's what we're trying to ask, or trying to answer. And I think that Strider gives us a bit of an answer a little bit later on 223. So Frodo has just read the letter, Gandalf's letter, and he says, why didn't you tell us you were Gandalf's friend at once? Oh, excuse me. And he says, Strider says, I knew nothing of the letter. For all I knew, I had to persuade you to trust me without proofs, if I was to help you. In any case, I did not intend to tell you all about myself at once. I had to study you first, and make sure of you. The enemy has set traps for me before now. As soon as I'd made up my mind, I was ready to tell you whatever you asked. But I must admit, he had added with a queer laugh, that I hoped you would take me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. But there, I believe my looks are against me. So I think he gives 3 answers to Frodo. Why the disguise? Why didn't you say anything? I think I had to persuade you to trust me without proofs is the first explanation. And I think that's an interesting one. I think that's, in part, I think that's an answer to why the disguise. Why were you carrying on that way? We're going to go back and read it a bit closer, but I think that the disguise and the rascaliness is part of his way of convincing them. The second, much more clear, is I had to study you first. You don't want to walk in as Aragorn, son of Arathorn, if you don't know who you're revealing yourself to, right? If you've had traps set for you before, even if Sauron doesn't know who he really is, even as a member of the Rangers, right? He would have had traps set for him. So don't, keep up a disguise. Don't reveal yourself. That's a good answer. And then finally, I hoped you would take me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. That seems counterintuitive. So he behaved rascally so that they would be his friend? That one I'm not sure about, but let's think on that as we go through, because there's one more I want to get to before we move back. And I think it informs the earlier chapters. So, next page. At last Frodo spoke with hesitation. I believed that you were a friend before the letter came, he said, or at least I wished to. I think we see evidence of that. I think when we go back and read sort of when Strider arrives in their room or in the parlor, I want to keep an eye for when does that show up? When do we see Frodo begin to want to trust him? Because I think there's a clear demarcation point. The other one I want to look for, and it'll just be speculative, but let me know when you think, because Frodo says you began to talk to us as the Bree folk, but your voice has changed. When do you think his voice changes? At what point? Because we don't have any way of knowing, but it's fun to guess. All right. So going back to page 213. Let me catch up on the chat one second. That's funny, Christy. Christy says, anyone else laughed thinking about Strider saying, my looks are against me, while having Viggo Mortensen in their head? Yeah, I would imagine Tolkien didn't have a vision of Aragorn as quite so handsome. Okay, I want to read a little bit from the beginning of chapter 10, and I want to keep in mind those 3 passages from earlier. Let's think about why the disguise. Hello, said Pippin. Who are you, and what do you want? I am called Strider, he answered, and though he may have forgotten it, your friend promised to have a quiet talk with me. You said I might hear something to my advantage, I believe, said Frodo. What have you to say? Several things, answered Strider, but of course I have my price. What do you mean? Answered Frodo sharply. Okay, so first of all, I am called Strider is an echo of what he said to Frodo already. So it's not my name is Strider, I am Strider, I am called Strider. That's exactly it. He is called Strider here in Bree, and he just doesn't correct anyone. And then he says, your friend promised to have a quiet talk with me. I love how Frodo plays it cool here. Like, I think he's trying to, I don't know, seem worldly. Like, I like to picture him as sort of like trying to affect leaning back in his chair and saying, yes, I believe you said I might hear something to my advantage. That's totally normal in my world. Please go ahead. And maybe I'm reading that wrong, but it's fun for me to think that he's trying to put on a facade, and then immediately after I have my price. What do you mean? Asked Frodo sharply. But this is really rascally, right? This is I have my price. I mean, this is affected, right? What's the effect of this? This is he's trying to sound like a rogue, and he does. What did we go to? That was the other thing I wanted to say. So what do you mean? I wonder, this is just me guessing, but when Strider says, I have my price, that would lead Frodo to think, I want you to give me something. What would Frodo be thinking of that he doesn't want to give him, and that would cause him to react sharply? Is this an example of ring possessiveness getting a hold of him? Or is this just, well, obviously he wouldn't give up the ring to some, ranger who he doesn't know. But the sharply makes me want, I feel like this is more reactionary out of him. Yes. Just play it cool, Frodo. Play it cool. Exactly. That's right, Christy. And Paige says, Holly says, Frodo loves to play worldly. It's what set him apart with Bilbo. Yeah, I think he does. So they haggle back and forth, no more than you can afford, etc. Oh, indeed, replied Frodo, surprised, but not much relieved. Even if I wanted another companion, I should not agree to any such thing until I knew a good deal more about you and your business. Excellent, exclaimed Strider, crossing his legs and sitting back comfortably. You seem to be coming to your senses again, and that is all to the good. You've been much too careless so far. So it seems to me the effect of the rascaliness is to make sure that there's a limit to how careless Frodo will be, right? Like, I think from Strider's perspective, this is like, okay, I'm going to put on an act like a real, rogue, make him think that, like, I'm absolutely untrustworthy. And is he so foolish and so reckless as to just be like, yeah, all right, sounds good. You can come with us. That's fine. And I think, okay, so he clears a pretty low bar, Frodo does, but at least he clears it. So I think this marks a transition point for Strider to me, where he drops a bit of the rascally act. Now, is that where he changes his tone? I'm not sure. I would guess not. But the next little sentence here. So Frodo says, "Go on then. What do you know?" Obviously, that means, I mean, Strider knows that means, what do you know about me and my business and all of this, right? And because the second thing he says is to answer that question. But he begins with, "Too much, too many dark things," said Strider grimly. What is that? What? This is a performance. This is performative, right? I mean, this is not a genuine answer to the question. That's obviously not what he means, because he goes on to say, "But as for your business," and then they're interrupted. So he knows he's asking about his business. So why say too much, too many dark things? Is that gravitas? Is that more rascaliness? I don't really get that one. Or is he just genuinely overcome by how many dark things he knows, and then he's just kind of staring out the window with a scotch, just go, "Oh, I know so much." Like, I don't see that. So this has got to be performative, but I'm not seeing the effect of it. Morgan says, "Sad boy Strider." Yes, exactly. Yes. Okay. So he goes on to reveal that he's been looking for a hobbit named Frodo Baggins, right? He drops the bomb that he and his friends know that they're carrying something out of the Shire that is of interest to them. So wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I know you've got the ring. And my friends and I are interested in it, right? That's rascally too, right? That's not, "Frodo, I've come to help you. I know you're carrying something dangerous. How can I help? I'm here because a mutual friend of ours sent me." Like, so again, we go back to his explanation. Why not reveal himself immediately? Well, he's not sure of them at first. But also, I have to persuade you to trust me. Is this rascaliness persuading them to trust him, right? I'm put in mind of a Sherlock Holmesism, right? Like where he says the best way to get people to tell you information is to make them disagree with you, make them correct you, right? Is he putting on a thinly and poorly veiled rascal act so that they will see through him to the good guy? I'm not sure. Holly, that's a good thought. He's the too much, too many dark things might be an attempt to build trust with someone who's newly experiencing dark things themselves. Yeah, maybe that's just credibility building. Maybe that's like, I have gravitas, right? I'm not just a cut purse. Yeah. Jesse says, "I thought it was just him getting lost in memories for a second." And maybe that's just it. Maybe what do you know triggered, oh, I know so much, possible. But I think he's kind of laser focused on the point here. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. Yeah, Christy, I think that's kind of what I'm getting at. She says, "I would think coming at Frodo all obvious and, hey, I'm here to help, could spook him." Yeah, and I think that's it. I think that they are probably going to be wired to reject that kind of help. Claire asks, "Is that line about dark things kind of way of looking down on them because they're hobbits and not known to leave their area? Like Frodo still hasn't really impressed him at this point." I wonder about that. I think it certainly it has the effect of establishing him as an authority on dark things, whereas he knows that they are not. But Gandalf has surely said good things about Frodo. I mean, he's really putting the lie to all that right now, but would he be looking to show them up? I think he's above that. Maybe? Like, he's so far beyond them that I don't think he needs to establish that to himself. Yeah. Right. Okay. So, what was the other next part? So after he says, a secret that concerned me and my friends, Frodo rises from his seat and Sam jumps up with a scowl. And when they do so, as they do so, Strider cries, "Now don't mistake me. I shall take more care of the secret than you do, and care is needed." And then he leans forward and gives them advice, watch every shadow, tells them about the Black Horseman. I mean, this is useful advice in their situation. And I think this is where we see Frodo's tone shift. This is my guess. There was a silence. At last Frodo spoke to Pippin and Sam. "I ought to have guessed it from the way the gatekeeper greeted us," etc., etc. "And why on earth did we behave so foolishly? We ought to have stayed quiet in here." Strider mentions something about the innkeeper, and Frodo begins, "Do you think he..." And then Strider cuts him off. But it is so significant to me that, Frodo goes from, I should advise Mr. Strider to explain why he had, if he had an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping, and what do you know, and all, he's asking all these challenge questions, right? And then once Strider says, "I will take better care of your secret than you do," and then tells them a bit of intel, his tone shifts. Frodo's tone shifts. And he starts talking freely with his companions about, "Oh, we should have done this," or "No, that's why this," right? And then he asks Strider's advice, or asks for insight. He's going to ask, "Do you think that Butterbur is evil?" Right? He has immediately made this shift to take him into his confidence, right? And I think the tone from Frodo shifts there. So that, to me, is an inflection point. And is that potentially where Strider's tone shifts, right? When he says, "Now don't mistake me. I shall take more care of the secret than you do, and care is needed." Is that when his tone shifts from putting on the Bree accent to speaking differently? And is that what triggers it? I'm not sure. Someone... I'm sorry, I forgot it was way up there, and I noted it, but forgot, suggested that maybe where Strider's tone shifts is a page or two later, where he talks about the riders, right? He says, "They will come on you in the wild, and in some dark place where there is no help. Do you wish them to find you? They are terrible." And the hobbits notice that his face is drawn as if with pain, and his hands clench the arms of his chair. I would readily believe that his tone has changed at the latest by then. I would agree. But did it happen before? That's my question. And that's an interesting passage too, right? I mean, he obviously knows something of these riders. He has anguish, he has pain. This is... I don't want to make light of it, but this seems PTSD-like, right? This is, he is having a visceral emotional reaction to talking about how terrible they are. He clearly has some experience with them, which is interesting because I think we find that they have not been abroad in quite a long time. And I would have guessed longer than he's been alive, but there's obviously something there. So, let me catch up on the chat, but where do you guys think that his tone shifts? And I do have one thought on why Frodo remember I said Frodo begins to trust him, or I wanted to trust you. I have a guess as to why that might be, and it builds on something we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks, but it might be a little spoilery now that I think about it. Anyway, give me your thoughts on that while I review here quickly. Yeah, Paige was making the point that Strider's knowledge about slinking about and knowledge about the riders that are following them would, she says, have the effect of bringing him down a peg from the positive side. And I would think that makes sense, right? But I guess he peppers in, I will take more care of the secret than you. But yeah, I would think that would seem dodgy, or should seem dodgy to the hobbits, right? Yeah. There are a couple other, well, okay. There are so many just good one-off lines in here. I could just yell them at the camera. Uh, Butterbur, a wizard they say he is, but he's a good friend of mine, whether or no. That good old Butterbur. I don't care if he's a wizard. He's a friend of mine. As the wizard. I mean, wizard obviously is not a highly thought of profession. Um, they don't. What did he say before to Frodo when he put the ring on? About the conjuring. If you're going to do any more conjuring or tumbling, we don't take kindly to it around here. Okay, I want to bring up one more thing that is a definite spoiler. So I'll just be 15 seconds here. So skip ahead if you don't want to listen to this. But when Barliman says later on, I don't know what the likes of me can do against, he faltered. Against the shadow in the east, said Strider quietly. Not much, Barliman, but every little helps. Does that not, for those of us who've read the book before, Strider is giving him a manful deed within his capabilities, which is exactly what he does to an entire detachment of an army later, when they don't have the fortitude to march. And he would be right within his rights to berate them, to dress them down, to court-martial them, to force them to march anyway. And he could say, Barliman, you forgot to send this letter. I'm going to demand that you do X, Y, and Z. But he gives him a deed within his capability, lets him save face, and lets him join the fight in as little or as big a way as he can. I think that's beautiful. Jesse, that's the other part that I thought it could be as early as this. Jesse says, I think Strider's tone might change as early as him sitting back and relaxing. That's the earliest I think that it could change. That was another point that I mentioned after Frodo declined his price of going with them until he learned more about him. That's a possibility. I think that's a little too early, my guess would be, because I still think he's keeping up the rascally act a little bit. But that would be the earliest point that I would guess as well. Yeah. Mighty Bearcat is agreeing with that. I think that's possible. Yes. Ollie says, I can't imagine wizard is a highly trusted class among those who do hard labor. Too much nonsense. Yeah, they're all those wizards. They're layabouts who never do an honest day's work in their life. I agree. No dirt under their fingernails. Lola says if they only knew who wizards really are. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't think they have any concept of the Astari or anything else. Maiar. Let's keep that in mind. A question that I would love to know is, what do Frodo and the other hobbits think Gandalf is? Because I don't think they think he's a man. I don't think we have evidence. I don't think we're going to get evidence to believe that. And in any case, Frodo knows that he was around a friend of the old Took, right? If he's a man, he's, 150 years old more? He knows men don't live that way. So is he an elf? Is he an elf wizard? I don't think he thinks he's an elf. I think, is wizard just its own class of species to the hobbits? Maybe. Yeah. Okay. There's more good chat going on, but I want to, there were a few things that I wanted to touch on very briefly. 3 or 4 sections here that I want to get to before we finish this chat here. So that was a good close reading. I liked that a lot. But let's do a couple more quick ones. So Mary's account of his little walk outside, page 26 or 226, my book. And so I want to reconstruct this a little bit from the Black Rider's perspective, from the human's perspective. What is happening here that Mary comes upon, right? So Mary says, I stayed indoors for an hour, then as you did not come back, I went out for a stroll. I had come back again and was standing just outside the light of the lamp looking at the stars. Suddenly I shivered and felt that something horrible was creeping near. There was a sort of deeper shade among the shadows across the road, just beyond the edge of the lamplight. It slid away at once into the dark without a sound. There was no horse. So he sees a black rider not riding, and I think it becomes clear that the rider did not notice him, or did not care about him, or took no notice of him in any case. It seemed to make off up the road, eastward, continued Mary. I tried to follow. Of course, it vanished almost at once, but I went round the corner and on as far as the last house on the road. Strider looked at Mary with wonder. You have a stout heart, he said, but it was foolish. I don't know, said Mary. Neither brave nor silly, I think. I could hardly help myself. I seemed to be drawn somehow. So that's interesting, right? That's a data point we should keep in mind. So I don't think we have any reason to believe that the Black Rider knows that he's there. We'll have reason afterward to think that maybe he doesn't, but he's drawing him anyway. So is this from an RPG perspective, like an active effect that like just has an aura around him that draws people? Like, it didn't really affect Frodo in the same way, but he had the ring. It didn't affect, I'm thinking about on the road to Crickhollow. It didn't draw Sam and Pippin to him. So maybe he was aware of him? I don't know. Like, your thoughts on that? Anyway, I went, and suddenly I heard voices by the hedge. One was muttering, and the other was whispering or hissing. Okay, so one is the Black Rider, the other muttering must be a human, right? I mean, the last house on the road eastward is Bill Ferny's house, so I think we can fairly safely assume this is the rider speaking to Bill Ferny. I couldn't hear a word that was said. I did not creep any closer because I began to tremble all over. Then I felt terrified, and I turned back and was just going to bolt home when something came behind me and I fell over. So At this point, the rider probably gets notice of him or becomes aware of him if he wasn't already. And the terror effect kicks in as he focuses on him. And then he comes up behind him. And Strider identifies what happens as the Black Breath. Now, the Black Breath obviously is something that the riders can do to incapacitate someone, but it's not just that they have this always on active effect of Black Breath, because they were up in Farmer Maggot's face and Gaffer's face and whatnot, and that's obviously not something that happened to them. Unless we think Farmer Maggot and the Gaffer are stronger by many margins than anyone in the universe right now. The drawn thing is interesting, and I want to move on to the next thing, but I want to try to remember that. Do they have the power of drawing people after them? He does feel compelled, and that's interesting to me, because he doesn't have the ring. He doesn't even really know what's going on, but he's drawn. Okay, so Paige, the Paige is asking, would the Black Rider be talking to Fernie about the stables? We won't have time to go into this, but I think the stables issue was a backup plan. I think he's getting news of Frodo's performance in the common room and the disappearing from Fernie, the rider is. And I think that he's probably telling him what to do, because the good bolsters that will get ruined and all, that's not the Wraiths. That's got to be Fernie and the Squint-Eyed Southerner going in and trying attempted kidnapping, right? So I think he's giving instructions, and whether he gives instructions for, and if you don't get them, clear out the stables so they can't get far, my guess is they don't. My guess is that's improvisation by Fernie, but we'll see. Quickly into, oh, look at this. We're almost an hour in. We haven't even talked about the first half of A Knife in the Dark. I think we bit off more than we can chew here. Is that right? I feel like that's right. I feel like a chapter and a half of this density was a lot for a week and for one stream. Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. Okay, Crick Hollow. I want to talk about Crick Hollow. We talked about it a lot on the server, but this is when Nazgul attack. I want to keep this in mind as a template for when Nazgul are attacking, because this coming week we're going to talk about that, and this is the template, right? This is, look at, it's so easy to skim over this. I did it for so long, but look at how long it takes them to attack. And they are attacking this whole time. This fear effect, this despair that they're pushing onto the house, right? All day, the feeling of fear had been growing on Fatty Bulger at Crick Hollow. This is around bedtime. This is after bedtime, but this isn't the dead of night. He's staring out into the gloom. A black shadow moves under the trees. The gate opens of its own accord and closes again without a sound. Terror seizes him. He shrinks back, and for a moment he stood trembling in the hall. Then he shut and locked the door. Okay, first of all, this is an excellent performance by Fatty Bulger. He moves. He does not fall Tharn prone, right? He doesn't freeze up. He has the temptation to, for a second. He shrank back. For a moment he stood trembling in the hall, but then he acts. He acts more, right? He runs, but he acts. He shuts and locks the door. Now look at how long this takes. The night deepened. The riders come in, they surround the house. There they stood, As still as the shadows of stones. What a line, eh? Still as the shadows of stones. While night went slowly on. There was a faint stir in leaves, and a cock crowed far away. The cold hour before dawn was passing. It is almost morning time. They have been besieging this house with fear the entire night. Fatty Bulger is gone. Gone. For hours, he's gone. And then they attack. Well, no, sorry, that's wrong. They have been attacking this whole time. Then they enter, right? And I think that is the model that we have to look at for when they attack again. Oh, the other thing I just want to talk about that there. I've talked about, I follow the Professor Corey Olsen, the Tolkien Professor podcast, and his Discord server. One of the best things, I guess he played the horn, or still does, and I never really understood the horn call of Buckland. It says, awake, fear, fire, foes, awake. How is that a horn call? Horns don't make that noise, except they do. He put words to those, he put noises to those words. So the horn call is ba-ba, ba, 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 awake, fire, fear, foes, awake. That's the horn call, right? And so now I can hear it, and it's so cool. I love that. Okay, Christy so asks, a clear deviation from the movies where the riders are in the inn stabbing the beds. Yes, I believe that was wrong. I mean, it was really effective, great scene, but I don't believe that was what happened. Strider says they will not attack a house that is well lit, and we have no reason to believe that he's wrong on that. In fear and loneliness, they are strongest. Or did I butcher that line? In dark and loneliness, they're strongest? Anyway, I can never get that one right, and I didn't on the Discord chat. But anyway, I think they sent in their henchmen to do the dirty work. And yes, Christy, the riders have a multi-pronged attack. Psychological warfare with the fear before any physical one. And I think even I would go further than that. The physical one is just the coup de grace at the end. It's a formality. Their attack is fear. That this is the Spanish Inquisition. Their primary weapon is fear. And then they, as needed, they will move in for a physical assault if necessary. But their entire attack, they are not tanks, right? They have the Black Breath, they have some Morgul weaponry, but I don't even know if that Morgul weaponry is physical. Is it real, or is it just spiritual, right? We'll get to that at Weathertop, but I don't think that they're offensive machines. Aiden asks, since the wraiths are somewhat otherworldly, not entirely alive or dead, do they find physical contact difficult? Do they need the psychological component to make their foes more susceptible to their touch? Hang on to that for Weathertop, because yes. Now, do they find physical contact difficult? Maybe. I mean, they're sitting on horses, and a cloak will cover them, not just pass right through them, right? So they have a physical form. They're more, I think they're just invisible in their physical form. But are they carrying real swords in a sense that, I mean, this is an open question. Could they stab Mary? I don't know. We'll find out. Yes, well, no Hobbit expects the Black Riders. Do the Black Riders have a fanatical devotion to Sauron? There you go. Matty M says, it still seems odd that they take all this caution for a hobbit, though. Do they think that the ring bearer might be more powerful or dangerous to them than a normal hobbit? No, I don't think they're taking precautions. I don't think that that's what this is. I think this is how they attack. I don't think that they would be effective in just sort of walking in and starting up, slashing things around, right? I think this is how they must operate. I think it is their nature. Okay. Quickly. Last one. Okay. Strider's decisions about Weathertop. This is what I want to talk about before we get there. So, Strider begins 225 in my book. Once with Sam's permission, it's settled that Strider will be their guide. I know one or two ways out of Breeland other than the main road. If once we shake off the pursuit, I shall make for Weathertop. And then Sam says, Weathertop? Said Sam, what's that? And then he answers that, and then Strider answers sort of the implicit why. It commands a wide view all around, and there we shall have a chance to look about us. Gandalf will make for that point if he follows us. So he gives two reasons why Weathertop. Commanding viewpoint, you can look around, and Gandalf will make for that point. Why are either of those beneficial? Okay, I see why the Gandalf thing... No, let me take that back. I see why the Gandalf thing is beneficial. It will become less so. But why is it beneficial to have a chance to look around? You're fleeing. Are you likely to see something on the road which will change your course? I mean, they do. But that's not a good thing. I don't understand his rationale here. And I think I'm going to have a guess later as to what his... I don't want to accuse Strider of lying. I just don't think this is good strategy. And I don't think he's above reproach on this. So then, page 239 in my books. Okay, they're in the Nicker swamp. As Frodo lay, tired but unable to close his eyes, it seemed to him that far away there came a light in the eastern sky. It flashed and faded many times. It was not the dawn, for that was still some hours off. And Strider says, it is like lightning that leaps up from the hilltops. Since Strider stands there watching it thoughtfully. He knows what direction Weathertop is, right? He knows what Gandalf's magic looks like. It's fireworks and similar, right? I think he's got to know that might be Gandalf and that might be Weathertop, right? So how does that impact his plan, or the one he articulated in Bree? Later on that page into the next page, he talks about Weathertop and he says we might reach it by noon tomorrow if we go straight towards it. I suppose we had better do so. They say, what do you mean? I read, what do you mean? As, well, you said we were going to Weathertop. Why are you saying now, I suppose we had better do so? Why are you equivocating? Surely we were hoping to find Gandalf there. Yes, but the hope is faint. If he comes this way at all, he may not pass through Bree, so he may not know what we are doing. And anyway, unless by luck we arrive almost together, we shall miss one another. It will not be safe for him or for us to wait there long. If the riders fail to find us in the wilderness, they are likely to make for Weathertop themselves. It commands a wide view all round. Indeed, there are many birds and beasts in this country that could see us, as we stand here, from that hilltop. Those are all really good reasons not to go to Weathertop, Strider. I mean, you're very unlikely to see Gandalf. I think he is lying here. Well, not lying, but obfuscating, right? He's giving an explanation that the hobbits will understand. I think he knows, or strongly believes, Gandalf was up at Weathertop hurling lightning bolts around for some reason. So he's almost certainly not there anymore. So he gives another explanation. Well, here's why Gandalf might not... It would be very unlikely that we would find Gandalf there. All of the reasons he gives would have applied in Bree too, right? And no one challenges him on that. I think he doesn't want to scare them and say, well, Gandalf probably just had a fight up there. So then he gives a whole bunch of other explanations or reasons why it would be a bad idea to go, all of which are correct. But then he says, I think, Frodo asks him, what does he advise? I think, answered Strider slowly, as if he was not quite sure, which I'm sure he isn't. I think the best thing is to go as straight eastward from here as we can, to make for the line of hills, not for Weathertop. Then we can strike a path I know that runs at their feet. It will bring us to Weathertop from the north and less openly. Then we shall see what we shall see. Okay, so that partially solves the we can be seen as we approach issue. But why are you going? Why are you going? And I think I have an uncharitable answer to that. 242. Strider's talking about Weathertop. Yet once it was tall and fair. It is told that Elendil stood there, watching for the coming of Gil-galad out of the west, in the days of the last alliance. I think Strider wants to go there because his forefather Elendil stood there, and in a momentous time, at a momentous period in history, he stood there, and he wants to recapitulate that. Because this is his time. This is his hour. There's a mythical significance to standing on Weathertop as the War of the Ring is to begin. I think that's why he wants to go. Because he doesn't give any good reasons, right? Doesn't he? Okay, so Paige is asking about looking ahead, looking behind, check for changes in weather. He's a ranger. That's a good thought, but he's a ranger. He shouldn't need to be up high to assess the weather. He could probably do that well enough. Maybe. But even then, if the weather changes, they're still making east for Rivendell, right? I guess what I'm getting at here, and I haven't articulated this clearly, they are the hunted, not the hunters. They shouldn't be up high where people could see them looking for their hunters. They should be scurrying around in forests as prey. That's what's bothering me. Yeah, so Paige says if Strider knew Gandalf was there, maybe I said knew, strongly suspected anyway, then maybe it's more to check Gandalf made it out safely. That's probably, yes, you're right. That's probably it too, and a more charitable explanation than mine, though I think I'm still right also. But that's a bad move. If Gandalf is dead on Weathertop, or if he made it out fine, either way, and especially if he's dead, your job is to get the ring safely to Rivendell. Why endanger it? What happened with Gandalf happened. You're going to get there in, 3-4 days? Or 2 days, or whatever it is? You're not going to get there in time to save him in this battle. So, why go? Why go? Chris, yes, it sounds like there isn't too many other options here. What other direction can they go in to get to Rivendell? Good point. Not many. They still have to go east, but they don't have to go by the road, and they could loop around north. It wouldn't be efficient. They would have to go way out of their way. That's a fair point. Yeah, Christy says Strider wants to do it for the gram. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he wants a selfie on top of Weathertop. Um, well, yeah, so Maddie says it's not useful but very symbolic, just like the carrying around a broken sword thing. Yes, that's a good point. And I think they do fit. They fit together, right? There is a mythic quality to carrying the broken sword, to going to up to Weathertop, recapitulating the pose that Elendil struck at the last alliance. Sure, and I think that matters, and probably should matter, but it's impractical. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm glad they didn't, because it would have made for a bad story. And let's leave it there for tonight. I am stoked. I think we need to, okay, we're going to finish chapter 11 and we'll do Flight to the Fort as well next week. I think we've established, and we'll confirm it next week, I think that's cramming a lot in. We may need to go chapter by chapter from now on, but let's see how next week goes. I'm not committing to it, but I'm right? That felt like a lot. Like, we just flew through the first half of chapter 11, and I feel like there was a lot more we could have done. But we'll have to keep doing it on Discord. So if you're watching this and you're not in the Discord server, click on the link in the description bar and subscribe. We'll let you know when I go live. And thanks, everyone. Have a good night.